Hello, everyone. I'm Tony Lombardi, and before we get into our first edition of Battle Plans, I wanted to say a few words because when we recorded this, we were unaware of the injuries to Gus Edwards and Marcus Peters. So, with that in mind, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that we weren't ignoring these big topics, but we weren't aware of them. So, I hope you enjoy our first edition of Battle Plans, which features the incomparable Dev Panchwa and James Ogden. Both are great guys and they are outstanding analysts, and I think that's going to come through. So stay tuned for the first edition of Battle Plans.
Hi, and welcome into the Battle Plans, aka Keys to Victory, here on Russell Street Report. I'm your host, Tony Lombardi, joined by analyst James Ogden and Dev Panchwa. Welcome in, guys. How are you today?
It's fantastic, Tony. We're closing in first game of the season. Woo!
Yeah, I'm doing great, Tony. Great to do this with you and Dev.
It's been a long time in coming because we've had so much content on Russell Street Report, and a lot of it is is analytical by nature. It's drilling down, looking at the Ravens off-season acquisitions that just keep coming in, with the additions of a couple of running backs, which we can touch upon a little bit later in the program. But they've given us a lot to talk about. But I know all of us are just ready to talk about a game. And so we're going to kick it off with these keys to the game as the Ravens travel to Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium to take on the Las Vegas Raiders. So, guys, let's just get right into it. We'll talk a little bit about the offense and the defense. But in the offseason, the Ravens really tried to focus a lot of their attention on fixing a couple of things, I think, in the offensive game plan and in the attack. And that is across the offensive line and at wide receiver. Now, you can make the argument that on paper, they've done both of those things very adequately. The problem so far, guys, is that they really haven't spent a lot of time on the field together because of injuries across the offensive front and obviously the nagging injuries in the receiving core. So with that in mind, let's talk about how you guys think that the Ravens ought to go about the game plan against the Raiders, and will those things in fact affect how you think Greg Roman's going to attack the Raiders?
So I'll kick it off. I think the way to attack this Raiders defense is going to be with our bread and butter, which is the running game. Our running game it is the best in the league, in my opinion. You could throw the 49ers in there, but I think persevering with that running game is going to be so important in this game, which means that some of the sort of question marks around our passing game in terms of the injuries to Bateman and Marquise Brown missing and Watkins missing most of camp. I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see us run the ball a lot. I don't think it's going to be a big blowout. I think it's going to be tight for quite a while, and I think they're going to have to persevere with it. But we're lucky that this Raiders defense is installing a new defense. This is Gus Bradley's defense now, and that's a new system that they're all having to get adjusted to, and an awful lot of new personnel up front as well. And I think that'll play right into our hands in the running game.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what James said, this is still a Raiders defense that in the offseason they did make a number of moves to improve their defensive front, but they have not proven, going back to last year, that they can hold up against the run. It's a lighter group, and one of the familiar faces that they brought in was Yannick Ngakoue. We know Yannick's not a good player against the run, right? So that's one example where it would be advantageous for the Ravens to still stick to the script and stick to the formula and get ahead in the down and distance. And James and I have spoken about this, but you want to wear this Raiders front out and wear them down, and I think the Ravens still have the formula to do that.
Now, one of the things that you talk about when you look at this defense is Gus Bradley. You guys had mentioned him, and he's a guy that's created some problems for Lamar in the past. So do you think that Lamar can learn from past, mistakes? And if you're Greg Roman, guys, what do you do to help make him feel a little bit more comfortable?
Yeah, I could maybe take that one. But with Gus Bradley, it's a patience-driven defense. So, they have faced similar schemes in the past, like last year against Indianapolis. I think that's a good benchmark game that Lamar can draw from and say, all right, well, he did a good job in the second half, kind of taking what the Colts gave him to advance and methodically drive the field. That's what they're going to have to do against a Gus Bradley style defense. A very much like, as James articulated very well, Seattle is at the roots. So if you think of the Seattle defenses that have from the past with Bennett and Sherman and those guys, a lot of the successful offenses hit them underneath, hit them in the middle of the field. So I mean, I think there's a blueprint for Lamar potentially going back to that Colts game.
Yeah, Dev, I agree. I think when you look at Gus Bradley's defenses over the years, when you look at what he built in Seattle, what you saw, and in the last couple of years with the Chargers, what you saw was him. Lots of people sort of unfairly talk about Gus Bradley's defense as quite a simplistic cover three, but there are a lot of adjustments to that coverage. And one of the things that Lamar has struggled with is kind of a really heavy underneath zone, which you get with a cover three. But he's made a lot of adjustments over the years to that, because a vanilla zone like that is just not going to get it done. I think this is a good time for us to play the Raiders, because that sort of the complications that you add to that cover three take time to install. The communication takes time to get right, possibly even the verbiage that those guys have got to deal with. So I'd be really surprised if they're coming out with a full Gus Bradley bells and whistles defense on that in that first game. And so we're probably lucky in that respect, but it will still be really key for Lamar, as Dev said, to kind of attack the weakness of that cover three. So we need to be premeditated in the way that we're targeting the flats, to start widening some of those zones to win the right to the middle of the field, to be able to throw the seam to Mark Andrews.
James, you, in your battle plans that we posted today on Russell Street Report, you went into lengthy detail about how to go about attacking that cover three. And one of the things the Raiders did well last year was cover tight ends. And obviously one of Lamar's favorite targets is a tight end, and Mark Andrews recently extended another 4 seasons with the Ravens. So talk about how they can get him freed up. And also you mentioned about throwing the ball out into the flats to spread the defense a little bit more, get them out of their comfort zone. But with that said, the guy that they've been really working with this whole summer camp and during OTAs, J.K. Dobbins, isn't available to the Ravens. So talk about those two things.
Yeah, so I think you have to, with cover three, you have to win the right to the seams. The underneath zone that you'll see needs to be manipulated. You can't just throw into a cover three zone and expect to be able to attack the seams well. And and when I say the seams, I don't just mean seam routes from tight ends. I also mean deep digs that we run an awful lot of. You see Marquise Brown get open across the middle a lot. To be able to throw into those seams in between the 4 defenders that will make up the underneath zone, you have to start to manipulate them and get them thinking about other things. And it's one of the things that we haven't done, I don't think, particularly well over the years, is throw to the flats very well. You make a great point about Dobbins, that was where this was going to go, I think, and that was, they were really building up to that and not having him. So you've got to get a bit more creative with it, basically, is the answer. I think you use Duvernay on pre-snap motion, and potentially get him with some momentum out into the flat, maybe use some bubble screens. I personally think you'll see Pat Ricard targeted early. I think, you slip him out of the backfield. Sometimes he's an underrated receiver, and will go unnoticed by defenses too. So there are ways to do it. It's going to be a lot harder. It would have been a lot easier if you could have just ran Dobbins out with his explosion into the flat. But I think there are ways around it. But it's, as Dev said before, patience is the key. You have to be premeditated. You have to be deliberate about doing those things to be able to open up the zone for Lamar a little bit more.
Dev, I know it's maybe premature, but one of the best pass catching running backs in the modern era is now a Raven, and Le'Veon Bell. Is it too soon to see him become part of this game plan?
I think so. It would be hard for me to see that. I mean, Monday does give them a little bit more time to work with, right? But I think it would be probably a lot to ask of an install and getting the game plan down for him to come in, Le'Veon Bell coming in. He would be a really nice chess piece to deploy though in this game. That's the tough part. So yeah, I think that would have worked well. But I think in lieu of that, to James's point, maybe get creative with Duvernay as an option. The other thing, I think there's two things I took from that breakdown that James just had. One is spread the field a little more. I think three receiver looks, James Proche, Duvernay we talked about, but I think even just spreading the field, I think will make things easier so that middle of the field is not tightly packed in. So I think that's one avenue. And the second, I think, did Greg Roman install more intersecting routes? We talk about those digs, but do you have crossing patterns incorporated, intersecting crossing patterns where two receivers are kind of, going with intermediate and then a deep pattern? So I think there's going to be levels that they need to incorporate to free these guys up. So I'm anticipating or hoping to see some of that. I don't know if we'll see it, but I think that'll help too against a defense like this.
Well, I know one of the things that I noticed during training camp and seeing some of the practices is you might have a guy running a shallow route, let's say from left to right, and he's in front of the linebackers. And then you've got another guy who's running a little bit deeper of the similar route, and he's maybe a step or two to the left of the hash mark, but he's in the same sight line as the quarterback. So you can kind of read off the drops of the defenders to really attack that seam. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Short to medium, short short deep is the read, right? Because I think that's what we're talking about in a nutshell, because it's going to be a lot of there's going to be a possibility for checkdowns even without Dobbins in this game. So regardless, I think you have to still, and this is going to set the table for the rest of the season. They need to be able to attack defenses with the right game plan, not necessarily be so dependent on personnel, and then kind of figure out where those pieces can fit in if they don't have them.
We saw the Ravens in preseason, not that that's a predictor of things to come, but we did see them also during training camp take a lot more shots down the field, particularly outside the numbers. Do you think this is the kind of defense that warrants those kinds of chances to take a few shots trying to loosen things up?
I mean, if Lamar is able to kind of hold the deep safety with his eyes and manipulate that defense, then yes, I think this is the kind of defense that you can go deep on. But again, it like I said, and like Dev said earlier, it's about patience. It's about setting that up. And I think one of the other big ways in which you set that up is play action and by running the ball well early and persevering with that. So that the threat of the running game is always there. One thing I wanted to say actually about the run game is I'm surprised at the way that the Raiders have set up their defensive line. Pulling back the curtain a little bit, I've been working on this battle plan for a little while, and I was working on the assumption that the new front that the Raiders brought, that Gus Bradley brought to the Raiders, would have their ends slightly bigger. I thought they'd be going with Max Crosby at the weak side defensive end position, and I thought that the 5 technique, which is the other side of the line, the strong side end in Gus Bradley's front, would be Cleveland Farrell or maybe even Solomon Thomas, who's played that position for the 49ers at the start of his career. But it looks as though they're going to go with Ngakoue as the Leo on the weak side end and Crosby starting at the strong side end. So that's a little light for me. And I would expect to see them get more heft on the field at some point throughout the game when they know we're going to be running it down their throat, because I just feel that's somewhere that we can really take advantage of. And if you can start to take advantage of that, then you're going to open up some holes deep.
We said at the top of the show that the Ravens have tried to get better across the offensive front with a lot of new personnel. They haven't had an opportunity to really play many snaps together other than in practice in recent weeks. But how do you think these guys match up, even in they're not in sync together? They haven't gelled yet, but how do you think they match up against this defensive front for the Raiders?
Might be the right time. It might be the right team to start with, because It's interesting because the Raiders themselves have a lot of moving parts, right? Because James outlined the number of guys they've added to this front. It's a scheme change as well. So I actually think, I mean, the Ravens are introducing new starters on the offensive line, but it helps that they're veterans. So we talk about, Alexander Villanueva, you talk about Zeitler, those guys are seasoned veterans. I think they can come in and do a lot of the things you need from them immediately, especially in the run game. You kind of simplify things. That's why getting after the Raiders in the run game, I think it helps on both ends. One, to calm this offense down that's had a lot of just kind of like you said, Tony, they just haven't had any playing time together. Start with that. Let them fire off the line. Let them get cranking that way. And two, I think it's also puts the pressure immediately on this Raiders defense, which wants to pin its ears back actually and rush the passer. And I think you'd kind of be playing into their hands with the way they're built. So I think that's the cure for an offense that hasn't had much playing time together.
And this is the thing, Dev. I think that their personnel, they have Hankins, who's a good run defender. That, believe it or not, people who think Cleveland Farrell's a bust, he's a good run defender. But I don't know how much they see the field. I feel like you said, that they're made to pin their ears back. That's why Crosby and Ngakoue are listed as the starting ends. So it'll be really interesting to see how much they get their good run defenders actually on the field.
One thing I'd like to just add in there, it's hard to do substitutions too when you're in a base. So the Ravens come out throwing the ball, and for a group like that where they have 8 or 9 guys they want to rotate. So I think that if anything, just come out and try to pound the football and keep them in one personnel group the entire time. To James' point, they maybe get into a heavier group, but that could actually play into the Ravens' favor, where they can kind of just go heavyweight versus heavyweight.
The one thing we should just quickly say is there are some players we've talked a lot about how the Raiders are installing a new scheme and how this is it might be a good time to play them. They have added some experience from Gus Bradley's scheme. So, Quentin Jefferson is a player on the defensive line who's played before for Bradley. KJ Wright has been brought in. So they do have some guys that have played for Bradley before. So they may have some kind of legacy there to be able to help them sort of gel that new defense in place.
Flipping to the other side of the ball and going up against the Raiders offense, let's talk about that, because they've got some firepower on that offense, and it really starts with a guy who used to wear the purple and black, Darren Waller. And James, you wrote in your piece that I believe the number was 145 targets last year. That's a heavy load. So he's obviously the favorite target of Carr's. And what do you think about Waller? What would be your plan of attack to try to, you probably aren't going to stop him, but you might want to try to contain him.
Yeah, I mean, you're just not going to stop Darren Waller. He will, and elephant in the room, the Ravens have not been good at stopping tight ends over the last few years, and they're gonna get tested early because Kelsey's coming up next and then Hawkinson. So this is a good test. I see a lot of takes about, Jimmy Smith's important to this because, we'll put Jimmy Smith on him, or some people sort of saying, well, we've got Marlon Humphrey, let's just put Marlon Humphrey on him. Waller runs like a receiver, and he's got 3-4 inches on both of those guys. So you can't really trail him. And the Ravens don't trail guys either, even against some of the best receivers in the league. They don't. Marlon Humphrey doesn't trail Stephon Diggs when we play the Bills. We don't do that. So I think the thing I would say is that their plan has to be multiple. And like you said, Tony, it has to be a limiting plan. Like you have to accept that he's going to make some catches, and Gruden is going to find a way to get him open and get him the ball. He's great on option routes. So you've got to take advantage. You've got to be very careful with that. My plan, I think, I put it in the piece I wrote. I think it's based off of kind of what some of the teams that managed to stop him last year did. The big one for me was the Patriots. The Patriots do what they do, and they took away the Raiders' best player on offense, and they did it mainly through sort of bracket cone coverage. They played one of their safeties in a robber technique. They put a guy on him and they bracketed him every play, and so he was running his running his option routes into zones with guys draped all over him. So it was very difficult for the Raiders to force the ball to him. The difficulty with that is that you do need to then be careful about the ways Gruden will scheme other people open because of the attention you're putting on Waller. But I think the Ravens have the horses to get it done. Like usually the teams that struggle with Waller are the guys who are the teams who don't have strength in depth in their defensive backfield, and aren't able to be really flexible about how they cover him. They put him in a bunch a lot, and we will have plenty of length on the field to be able to deal with that. If he comes out of the bunch in strange angles and gets some big plays, and we'll have guys that will be able to cover him. So I'm optimistic about limiting him. But maybe that's a bit too optimistic given the Ravens' track record.
Well, the danger in trying to limit him too much and investing resources to do that is the Raiders do have speed in other places on the field. Dev, talk about those guys.
Yeah, Henry Ruggs is a second-year player. We know he can get down the field. He was underutilized by the Raiders last year, to their own admission. I think John Gruden came out, actually was very outspoken that they didn't use him as much as they should have, or they didn't get him involved in more of a diversity of routes. So he's the guy that you would pay for depending on how you want to scheme and defend Waller. I mean, in the case that James outlined of a New England scheme, yeah, Belichick will take Waller out, and then he'll take his chances that Ruggs is contained. So can the corners handle his speed downfield? Edwards is the other second-year receiver, and he's not quite the burner that Ruggs is. However, he's a guy that can be physical downfield. He can win on jump balls. So you're looking at single coverage with both of those guys, and then Renfro is their slot guy who has some skills underneath as well to exploit coverage. So it's going to be a challenge, and that's what I think, which is so interesting. Last year it was the Waller show, and they got away with it because he's that good. I mean, he's still just dominated no matter what, because you would think a guy that has that much focus at some point would slow down, and it didn't happen. But I think these other guys, all these receivers are young. Did they take a step forward? And if they do, is there enough confidence that they could beat the Ravens in single? And that's the question Wink is going to have to ask himself. Do we just leave our guys out there? It's single coverage. We'll take our chances, but these guys are capable of winning downfield and making big plays.
James, you brought up the concept of eye candy as it relates to Derek Carr. And you said, let's kind of flip the script on him and let's see what Wink can do in showing Derek Carr a little bit of eye candy. Expand upon that.
Yeah, so for anybody who's watched Gruden's offenses in the last couple of years, there's an awful lot of pre-snap motion. He gives you a lot of eye candy, and so you do need to sort of account for that. But I sort of countered that in the piece with, we make teams march to the beat of our drum. On defense, when we are at our best, we are attacking on defense, and that's what Wink does best. He's the Mike Crawford would say, he subscribes to Sun Tzu's the art of war. He is gonna attack you, and I think what that does is it plays into the fact that Derek Carr, I think, is at his best when he's aggressive, and when he can be aggressive, it's when there isn't a lot of confusion around. The Ravens have the most confounding defensive scheme in the NFL to quarterback, so it would be. I suspect getting it will help us to get him hesitant. The only little caveat to that I would say is that Derek Carr's had some good games against us in the past. Like, he has gone off a couple of times, so albeit I don't think I seem to remember they weren't Wink Martindale led defenses. But I think that the way that we attack quarterbacks will you will see it have an effect on Derek Carr as it has an effect on most of the quarterbacks in the league, not named Patrick Mahomes.
Dev, in regard to that, in the different looks that Wink is willing to give opposing offenses, talk about how that might be a problem for the Raiders' offensive line, because those guys haven't played a lot together either.
Yeah, it's a great point. Not only have they not played a lot together, there are a lot of young players up front. this is going to be like if you are a student going into a PhD class for the first day, almost like you're gonna get your head's gonna be your head's gonna be swimming. And I think that's what's gonna happen. This is a young line, so you better believe Wink is gonna pull out a lot of looks that he didn't use last year, that they have never seen in their life. I anticipate a lot of bluffs where you show the blitz on one side, you come from the other. We saw Patrick Queen used a lot as an inside blitzer in the preseason. He just gave a little taste of some of the zone drops and just all the bag of tricks that he's done in the preseason. So there's some film for them to even kind of look at, but that Wink is probably already prepared for the Raiders and showing some things that he's not going to even use in this game, just so that this offensive line is absolutely tested. And I think, especially on the tackle spots, is where I feel like they are vulnerable. Interior veterans that they had lost, Hudson, Gabe Jackson, as James outlined in the piece, and then they lost Trent Brown as well. So if you look at that group, interior wise, they're vulnerable, but they still, I feel like they have Incognito back in the fold, right, James? So I think they're still like some stability inside, but offensive tackle is where I could see them really struggling to handle the pressures.
And that brings us to their running game, the Raiders' running game. We haven't really touched upon that. And Gruden's not afraid to lean on the running game. So talk about how he might use that, James, in terms of setting up the pass.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to run the ball, and the changes they made on the offensive line were sort of bent towards that. I feel like they were disappointed with the running game last year, and they took an awful lot of bad press for the way that they went about rebuilding that offensive line. But like I said, I think it was because they have a real commitment to running the ball a bit more. Alex Leatherwood, for all of his kind of concerns coming out, I can see him being a pretty good run blocker in the NFL. So I think what you're going to see is they are going to run the ball more. I think they're going to run the ball more efficiently. But I think the gains that they've made in the running game are going to hurt them in pass protection. You've also got to bear in mind, you've got Kenyon Drake coming in, so they've got a little bit more dynamism in that running back room. So it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. I suspect that offensive line is going to be better, but I'm not sure it's going to be better game one out of the gate.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. It's a big ask. I don't think that their transformation was meant to be ready game one. But long term, I could see the benefits of the moves that they made, especially Leatherwood and some of these younger guys. Like, I think to James' point, they have an overarching game plan. And Tom Cable's a renowned offensive line coach, and I know he and Gruden have history together, so they could ultimately come out on top of this. But it's going to mean a short-term losses, and especially in the pass blocking situations. And I think we'll also see what the Ravens' pass rush is made of as well. I mean, this is an opportunity to start with, to gear up for Kansas City the following week. Not to say they're going to look past the Raiders, but I think this personnel group, the rush patterns, what Wink wants to do with his personnel and how he wants to substitute them, all of that, there's a good opportunity to test all that out with this young group. And I think just an offensive line that is probably going to struggle to pass protect for the first half of the season, majority of the season at the minimum. And Carr's going to be under pressure, I think, pretty consistently.
I actually think, Richie, I think Incognito is out for this game. I think he's missing for this game.
All right, well, there you go.
That will affect them even more, I think. I think it's John Simpson out of Clemson a couple of years ago that's coming in. And also, I wrote in battle plans that Nick Martin would be the center, but it's not going to be Nick Martin. It'll be Andre James. So there's an awful lot of flux on that line, and it'll be interesting to see how they manage that.
All right, guys, we're going to put a bow on this, and I'll do that by revisiting the past for a moment. Gerald McCoy, a guy that the Ravens recruited heavily to try to bring to Baltimore, And usually when the Ravens put a full court press on that includes players, they get their guy, but they did not in the case of Gerald McCoy. He left the Tampa Bay Bucks to go on to play for the Carolina Panthers. Now he is a Raider, and you guys have earmarked him along with Kevin Zeitler as the matchup to watch out for in this game. Talk about that.
So the reason we kind of identified that was because I actually think, I always want to put a stake in the ground and say it's going to be one guy. So Gerald McCoy was the guy we picked. I actually think the interior for the Raiders defensive line will be a bit of a rotation, and you'll see Quentin Jefferson come in, and obviously Jonathan Hankins will be a big player there. But McCoy is interesting because of the reasons you outlined, Tony. I think the main thing is just to see like how much better the right side of that in the interior is going to be with Zeitler is going to be the thing to watch. We got really spoilt with Marshall Yanda, and then realized last year how crucial Marshall Yanda was to the integrity of the pocket for Lamar. And I think Lamar, although has clearly done a lot of work on his base over the course of the offseason, his base sort of went off a little bit when he got pressure up the middle, and he saw quite a bit of that last year. So it'll be really the one to watch will be Zeitler to see how he handles a decent interior defensive line in pass protection, and hopefully that'll be a sign for the future for the rest of the season that he handles it pretty well.
So overall, how do you guys feel about this game? Coming home with a W?
I think so. Yeah, I think it could surprise a bit just because it's the first week and there's some elements. Again, we touched on the fact that both teams are not very settled coming into this game, but ultimately, I think the Ravens just have too much. Especially, I feel like that their offensive front being able to push the Raiders around, and then on the flip side, we talked about how this defense, the Ravens defense, look, but the Ravens defense didn't have any disorganization and unsettledness this preseason. They've been firing on all cylinders, and I expect that to kind of continue in this game.
Yeah, we've been spoiled by first game blowouts for the last sort of 4 years. I'm not sure that it's going to be a blowout. I think they will score points, Vegas, but like Dev says, like our defense is locked and loaded and ready to go, and I think we'll see that. So I'm pretty confident for this game. I think it'll be a bit tighter than people think, and I think we may get some frustrations about not persevering with the running game late into games, as we sometimes get from fans about Greg Roman's play calling style. But I think ultimately they will get the job done, and will probably pull away late to make it look a little bit more comfortable than it was.
Sounds good, gentlemen. So thank you for your time today. And also be sure to check out James's battle plans, which dropped on Thursday today, and also his keys to victory, which will be dropping on Saturday. So thanks for joining us here on the battle plans, AKA Keys to Victory. I'm Tony Lombardi, along with James Ogden and Dev Panchois. Thanks for joining us.